Okay, here we go. How to meter. This is so strange for me because when I started in photography, this is the very first thing that I learned was how to meter. And now people don't even know their cameras have meters in them because they stick them on an auto mode and they just go. Okay, in your camera, you have a meter. At the bottom, you have something, a center point, and you have a plus and a minus with a bunch of little lines or something on it, okay? Some of the cameras have multiple little lines that will move around, like little LEDs. Some of them will have one that moves around. The proper exposure is at 0. So let's have everybody right now, let's just set your aperture to, let's say, f5.6, okay? And go set your ISO to like 400 ISO. So I picked your aperture and your ISO for you. So the first thing you're going to do is pick your aperture. So I gave that to you, so 5.6. And I'm just picking 400 so that if you point outside, you should be good to go. So go to some place that you can point outside. And now all you need to do is turn the dial for your shutter speed until that meter goes to 0. Okay? When it's at 0, it's the proper exposure and you can take your photograph. Okay? If you're turning the dial and it's blinking at you in there, it's saying, yo, dummy, you're too far this way, go the other direction. So start turning the wheel the other direction. And you'll see after a little while, you kind of figure out where it's at. But like I said, some of them will have multiple little LEDs that go to 0, and the other ones will have one that'll move around. But 0 is the proper exposure. So that's how you take a meter reading. You meter, so you set your aperture, okay? Then you dial your shutter speed in. Then you set your ISO. I gave you the ISO first because I'm just kind of guessing if you're on a sunny or cloudy day it should work. So it's always, 99% of the time, aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Okay? I have a saying, it's called absolutely stunning images. ASI, aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Get that in your head. So you pick your aperture, you go, okay, I want a shallow depth of field. So I'm going to shoot at f4. Okay, and then you go, okay, I need my shutter speed. Dial my shutter speed in. If the shutter speed is too slow, then I need to make my camera more sensitive, so I bump my ISO up. And a really easy way to decide if you're hand holding, if your aperture is too slow, or excuse me, if your shutter speed is too slow, is whatever the focal length is of your lens, and that will be on a zoom lens, it'll be on the front somewhere. There'll be little numbers on there. And so let's say you're using a 50 millimeter lens, okay? If you're using a 50, you need to be above a 50th of a second. So you need to be that number or higher for your shutter speeds. So if you're shooting with a 200 millimeter lens, you need to be 200th of a second or higher to be able to hand hold it. If you're shooting with a 14, you only need to be at a 14th of a second. And the reason that is, I don't know if you can get my arms in your SE. Can you get them all the way in? Yeah? No? How about now? There we go. Yeah? No? Okay. This way? There we go. Sorry, we're trying to. So, if I'm shooting a wide angle lens, okay, and I have some movement, you know, like that much, it's not very much because I have a wide angle view. If I take that same movement with a 200 millimeter, it's going to be a less of an angle of view, so that same movement moves around a lot more, okay? So you need to compensate for that. So it's a really good rule of thumb. Whatever your focal length is, you need to be that number or higher. So 50 millimeter, 50th of a second or higher, so the closest is probably a 60th. 200 millimeter, 200th of a second or higher, okay? So there you go. This is the most, you got to really get this down though, because this is the most important part of this whole thing, is how to meter.